Hello, today I would like to show some editor tooling I made for level development in Unity. First I would like to show my tree generator, which randomizes trees set from certain parameters. All these trees that you see here are procedurally generated and they can be regenerated with this small helper script. I'll just turn off the fog to make it more visible. Each tree is its own game object, which have a seed, a age, and a reference to a scriptable object which contains all the settings. The seed can be randomized with another button here. This button here just calls this one, just to make it easier to select all the trees. The age slider changes depending on the age of the tree. It's a value from 0 to 1 that controls certain parameters. The parameters that it controls can be seen here, and leaves and branches can be controlled individually. Let's take crookedness for example. Right now the tree, when it's small, becomes crooked, as you can see. There's each vertex distorts a little bit. We can change that in the trunk settings. If we go to crookedness, right now it's set to 1. I can just change this to 0 and then regenerate the tree. You can see how the UVs are probably unwrapped and do not change scale, even on the branches. However, there's currently a work in progress, which is the end of branches. They do not have face vertices at the end. I would like to make the trunk a little bigger. So I'll just go into the tree type, go into the trunk, and then change the flare value. Now you can see the trunk became a little bigger by just a small margin. You can also notice that the leaves on these trees have a certain shader on them that makes them more blue the further they are to the ground. So you can see here clearly that the leaves close to the button are bluish, and the ones at the top are more yellow. Another tool that I made is the terrain tool, which allows for a classical tile-based drawing in a 3D environment. If we click on the terrain, we can see that it's a huge it's not a huge object in fact, but it's many smaller chunks. Each of these chunks are its own separate mesh, and all these props are baked into the same mesh. The same with the trees. The trees are also one single mesh and are generated at runtime or build time, depending on your needs. The advantages of build time generation is that you don't have to do as much startup processing to generate the trees. However, you have to store more vertex data in your scene. Now the terrain tools can be accessed by just clicking on the terrain. They pop up here and are integrated in the editor. You can increase the height or lower the terrain. I just turn on wireframe view to make it more visible. You can use the Flattened Tool to select a piece of the terrain by holding Shift and then using it to draw the same height. So if I select here, I can flatten all to what it's supposed to be. Furthermore, you can draw tiles on the terrain, and you can see that the props will generate only on certain drawn terrain. So here there's only grass added right now, it generates on the grass tiles, and you can also see there's a shader on them that allows them to sway in the wind. The grass right now are just simply two planes, cross planes, and are not much more than that. They are defined in they're just built in Blender and can be whatever you want them to be. You can also notice that grass is not made inside of objects, so if we remove this house, I'm a liar. What? That's not good. On the terrain there's a prop exclusion layer. We can set this to prevent props from spawning on other colliders. If we re-render the chunks, you can see if I lift this placeholder house, there's no grass underneath. These are also controlled from a scriptable object, which all terrain settings are stored in. You can see this here. All the drawings are stored in simple textures, so you can see here the river and the paths are stored in the texture. And all the tile sets here are its own scriptable object, which has these auto-place props on them. Each prop also is a scriptable object, which this one, grass, has a density slider that we can change. If we want fewer grass, for example, we can lower it and then regenerate the terrain. You can see there's much more sparse grass now. Again, props can be anything you would like. They're not limited to foliage. Right now it's a bit clunky to change the layer you're drawing with, since it's a number over here. But in the future I would like to add easier access to this. Each layer, you can see that the bottom tile set is drawn underneath the top tile set, and they're independently drawn. So you can see here that gravel is between earth and grass. This is so we can have fairly smooth transitions between grass and earth. Again, each terrain chunk is its own game object. Right now, each terrain has its own texture. These textures are generated at runtime with the compute shader where they're overlaid. So this is actually just one texture. However, this is probably not desired in especially larger cases where, for example, this map where you have hundreds of megabytes of texture data just to store the textures. It would be an advantage just to render more vertices and then tile the texture. So instead of here just drawing one plane, you would draw 3 on top of each other, one for each layer of material, and then you would mix and match the UVs to make the same result. The last tool here is a little bit different. It's a runtime tool. It was meant to act as a level creator, all in one. Kind of a replacement of Minecraft. It was really inspired by Minecraft, since making levels in Minecraft is really easy. You can see here that we're in a level that is reminiscent of Minecraft. Let's try to add a house here. There's this selector where you can select your different tiles. Here's the house tile. If I build it, you can see already a tile appeared, but we didn't choose there to be a chimney here. This was automatic. The chosen tile is dependent on the neighboring tiles. So if we continue building here, you can see some error tiles because I haven't set it to, it doesn't know what to choose when there's only 4 tiles like this in this configuration. So let's continue building a little, and you will see a house taking shape. You can see here the walls are beginning to show. And now that we built 2 layers, all the settings are in place to make a complete building. In the middle here, it's undefined, since there's no inner building tiles. But you can see here it has chosen its tiles from the selection. This can be also done with stuff like foliage. These are randomized tiles. They decide the tiles themselves. These are also just meshes. As a result, the resulting mesh is also chunked like the other system, and the materials are merged into objects. So each object has its own mesh and a single material. So for each material you have a separate mesh. You can see here I've selected the material checker, which is the error material. Here you can see I've selected the house. These are static, so I cannot move them in the runtime, but I can uncheck them, and you can see how here that this single chunk has all the materials built in here, and the same with the foliage, which there is none in this specific chunk. Actually, here you can see that the foliage are themselves can be objects if you want to. There's a lot of customizability here. In the creator, again, tile sets are scriptable objects, which here has a bunch of rules where you can change random rotation and scale. These are used for the foliage, for example. And then a bit mask is used to compute which prefab to spawn. In the end, the resulting tool is a bit cumbersome to use because it's hard to calculate the masks. I made another tool in JavaScript with a 3D editor, so you can easily make or pick your bit masks to easily design tile sets. But it's still time consuming to create these tile sets. But the end result is very fun to play with, and it's a fine editor tool in my opinion, but it has a ways to go before it's really usable.